Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Unboundverse. Today's story is about a country whose the world stood in awe of their transformation. But for the people of this nation, the journey had only just begun. They knew that development was not destination but a continuous process. With each passing day, this country strove not just to preserve the gains they had made, but to ensure the future generations would inherit a country that was not only free but flourishing. Again, this is a story about how a nation overcome all of its challenges and become what the whole world is talking about in awe. This country in particular that I'm talking about, whose language was overridden by their colonizers' language, whose educational system was created by the people that colonized them, whose government system was set up by their colonizer, whose citizens are majorly ignorant and illiterate, whose citizens appreciate nothing of their own but of their colonizer, whose citizen doesn't value each other's life, whose citizens relentlessly travels to their colonizer's country, whose citizens have few mentally developed, got together and became truly developed and truly independent. In a country once proud of its culture, history, and language, the dark days of colonization loomed like a shadow that refused to lift. The colonizers, having dominated every aspect of life, had replaced the native language with their own. They had rewritten the educational system to reflect their values and built a governing system that served their interests long after they had physically left. The citizens of this nation, once vibrant and forward-thinking, now found themselves trapped in a cycle of ignorance, poverty, and dependence. They admire everything foreign and disdained their own. Their language, art, traditions, and inventions were relics in the eyes of the young. They spoke of the colonizers' language with pride. They embraced their educational systems and set their sights on traveling to the former colonizers' country, where they believed success and opportunity lay. In their own homeland, few saw value in their culture or each other's lives. Violence and disgrace and disregard for human life became a daily reality. Unity seemed like an impossible dream. For years, this country's leaders too were trapped in the same mindset. Elections were held with corrupt motivations. Policies were modeled after those of the colonizers, and the citizens believed that any salvation would come from outside, from the very nations that had once oppressed them. Education, as designed by the colonizers, failed to foster critical thinking or encourage the celebration of their own heritage. Most of the countrymen was illiterate, not only in the technical sense, but also in self-awareness. They didn't understand their worth, their potential, or the richness of their roots. But in the midst of this bleakness, a small, often ignored group of intellectuals, group of artists, and group of revolutionaries began to emerge. These were the few who, despite the overwhelming cultural pressure, had committed themselves to relearning their history, to rediscover their language, and to reimagine their country's future. They saw beyond the surface level allure of their colonizers' system and recognized the inherent potential within their people and land. This group, small but fierce, started an underground movement which they called the Awakening. Their aim was not to violently overthrow the current system, but to radically transform the collective mindset of the people. They believed that true independence and development could only come when the people regained their sense of self-worth, their sense of language, their sense of identity. It began with the education. They established schools in remote villages where the native language was reintroduced as a primary medium of instruction. History lessons were rewritten not from the colonizer's perspective, but from the perspective of their ancestors. Students learned about the scientific, cultural, and philosophical achievements of their people before colonization. They began to understand the depth of their heritage and the richness of their language. The curriculum was designed not only to produce literate citizens, but to produce thinkers, innovators, and creators who were proud of their identity. This educational revolution spread slowly at first, but its impact was undeniable. Graduates of these schools began to rise in their communities, pushing for changes in the local governance and advocating for a return to the native language in public spaces. They used social media to share stories of their ancestors. They used social media to showcase native arts, and they used social media to celebrate their culture. Over time, a cultural renaissance began to take shape. At the same time, a political government arose from within. The Awakening. Young, passionate leaders who were educated in the new schools began to challenge the old political order. They rejected the colonizer's system of governance and proposed a model built on traditional system of leadership combined with modern democratic principles tailored to their unique culture and needs. They believed that a country's political system should reflect its people's, not foreign ideas. The road was not easy. The entrenched elite, many of whom had benefited from the old order, resisted fiercely. Foreign powers, too, were wary of this rising movement and attempted to destabilize it through media campaigns and economic pressure. But the citizens were slowly changing. More and more people, especially the youth, began to embrace their identity and realize that their future didn't lie in the colonizers' countries, but in their own land. Then came the tipping point. A generation of leaders educated in the native language, grounded in their culture, and inspired by the promise of a new future took power. These leaders enacted sweeping reforms in education, healthcare, and governance. They established institutions that were uniquely theirs, universities that promoted indigenous knowledge alongside global advancements, hospitals that combined modern medicine with traditional healing practices, and a governing system that emphasized community, transparency, and accountability. The citizens themselves began to change. With a renewed sense of pride, they stopped idolizing foreign goods and values. Local industries flourished as they realized the quality of their own products. The music, the art, and the literature of the land found new life as they told stories of resilience, hope, and a future where they were the masters of their destiny. They celebrated their language in songs, films, and public speeches, making it cool again to speak the words of their ancestors. Perhaps the most significant shift was in how the citizens treated one another. As they regained pride in their culture, they began to see the value in each other's lives. The senseless violence decreased as communities came together to solve problems through dialogue and mutual respect. Where before there had been division, now there was unity. The country began to thrive economically, socially, and politically. They built strong trade partnership based on equality, no longer relying solely on the former colonizers. More importantly, the citizens stopped fleeing to foreign lands in search of opportunity. They realized that everything they needed was right there in their own soil, language, and in their own people. This transformation did not happen overnight. It took decades of persistence, struggle, and sometimes failure. But in the end, this once colonized, delusioned country became a beacon of true development and independence. They had risen not by copying others, but by rediscovering themselves. The world took notice, not because they were the wealthiest or the most powerful, but because they had done what few nations could. They had reclaimed their soul. As the country continued its upward trajectory, the world watched in awe. What was once considered a nation trapped in perpetual dependency was now a model of resilience, cultural revival, and self-determination. The citizens who had once viewed themselves as inferior began to take pride in their unique contributions to global progress. No longer shackled by the idea that advancement meant abandoning their roots, they forged a path of development that seamlessly blended their past with modern innovation. Their educational system, which had been transformed in the early stages of their renaissance, produced a generation of thinkers, scientists, and artists who used their native language to articulate groundbreaking ideas. This language, which had once been considered a barrier to success, now became a powerful tool of expression, enabling innovation that was both culturally informed and globally relevant. The scientific community, once hesitant to recognize the work coming from the country, could no longer ignore the technical breakthroughs and discoveries that emanated from this reborn nation. Agriculture, the lifeblood of their economy, was revolutionized by indigenous knowledge combined with cutting-edge technologies. Farmers, once relegated to the margins of society, were now celebrated as innovators and guardians of the land. They applied ancient techniques of soil preservation, crop rotation, and water conservation, blending them with modern methods like precision farming and renewable energy. Food production soared, and the country, once dependent on foreign imports, became a net exporter of high-quality organic products. The arts and culture also flourished in this new era. Music, film, literature, and fashion rooted in their heritage became global phenomena. Instead of copying trends from the West or other powers, their artists proudly showcased their own stories. They proudly showcased their own rhythms, and they proudly showcased their own designs. The world couldn't get enough of it. International festivals celebrated their films, museums displayed their art, and their fashion designers took the global runways by storm. But what made it truly remarkable was that it wasn't just the aesthetic appeal that attracted attention. It was the depth of cultural wisdom embedded in their creative work. Politically, the country became a stabilizing force in the region. Having abandoned the colonizers' model of governance, they had developed a system that emphasized communal responsibility, dialogue, and shared leadership. This system proved far more resilient to corruption and power grabs, as the old political elite had been replaced by leaders who were raised in the ethos of service to the people and pride in their heritage. Other countries in the region, struggling with similar post-colonial challenges, began to take notice and sought to learn from their example. The world's former power, who had once dismissed this nation as nothing more than a source of cheap labor and raw materials, now scrambled to engage with them on equal terms. Trade negotiations were no longer one-sided. The country's leaders demanded fair deals, sustainable practices, and mutual respect. With a strong domestic economy, they were no longer beholden to exploitative trade agreements or financial aid tied to foreign interests. This shift in global power dynamic did not go unnoticed by the citizens. They saw that they no longer had to travel to distant lands to seek opportunity. Now, people from all over the world were coming to their shores to learn, to collaborate, and to invest. The brain drain that had plagued the country for generations was reversed. The diaspora, many of whom had left in search of better lives, began to return, bringing with them valuable skills, knowledge, and capital. These returnees were not just welcomed home, they were celebrated as key contributors to the country's continued growth. But perhaps the most profound change was in how the citizens viewed themselves and each other. A culture of solidarity had taken root, replacing the divisions that once tore communities apart. The value of human life was once again held sacred. The streets, once rife with violence and apathy now thrived with vibrant community life. People began to collaborate on local projects, clean their neighborhoods, and ensure that everyone, regardless of their background, had a voice. Healthcare was revolutionized with a system that blended the best of traditional medicine with modern scientific practices. Village healers worked side by side with doctors trained in the latest medical technologies, creating a healthcare model that was accessible, affordable, and culturally relevant. Infant mortality rates dropped, life expectancy soared, and mental health, long ignored, became a national priority. In the international arena, the country began to lead on issues such as climate change, fair trade, and global peace efforts. Their unique perspective, born from the struggle of overcoming colonization and internal divisions, gave them an unparalleled ability to mediate in global conflicts. Their leaders were invited to speak at international forums, not as junior partners, but as equals whose voices carried weight. The turning point perhaps came when the country was recognized as a cultural and intellectual hub. Universities from around the world established partnerships with their institutions, and international students flocked to study their unique blend of traditional and innovation. It was here that the Global South began to redefine the narrative of development, with this nation at the forefront. No longer was development measured solely by GDP or Western standards of success. Indeed, it was understood as a holistic process, one that included cultural preservation, environmental stewardship, and the well-being of the entire population. Finally, the nation had achieved what once seemed impossible: true independence. It was not just the kind of political independence that came with the lowering of one flag and the raising of another. It was a deep, self-possessed independence, an understanding that their worth did not come from outside validation, but from their own history, from their own culture, and from their own potential. The citizens had reconnected with their roots. They reclaimed their language and restored their dignity. The world stood in awe of their transformation, but for the people of this nation, the journey had only just begun. They knew that development was not a destination, but a continuous process. With each passing day, they strove not just to preserve the gains they had made, but to ensure that future generations would inherit a country that was not only free, but flourishing. If you have all learned one or two things from this story of a country that got together and turned around its future, support this channel by hitting the like button and the share button to get this video across to everybody. All humans located all around the world have the ability and the intuition to govern themselves and care for their citizens, and most importantly, to value their own land and everything that is beneath their land. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Bye for now.